Welcome back to Prospect Channel TV. My people, we don't come back again with another Ogbonge update. This one will shock you. From isolation to global spotlight, Nnamdi Kanu don't gain world leaders' support. Una know say Nigerian government dey try am, think say dem go break am, not knowing that this trial has actually brought Mazi Nnamdi Kanu to global spotlight. This is really wow. This video you were about to watch will wow you. How far Mazi Nnamdi Kanu has gone globally. And right now, Nigerian government, they hide face because they don't know, say, they don't commit. You understand? They have committed crimes. How do I put it? Against humanity. This Mazi Nnamdi Kanu matter is not supposed to be here again, if we really know what we are doing, but we are still here. So guys, I'm going to drop this video. All of us go watch am together. Nnamdi Kanu has gone far. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu has left Nigerian government behind. So I go drop am, we go watch am together. I will be right back. But before then, guys, I beg subscribe to this channel if you have not. Share this video, make it go viral.
As Nnamdi Kanu prepares for his next federal high court appearance in Abuja on July 18, 2025, several African and global leaders have stepped forward in support of him and the Biafran movement, intensifying international attention on his case. The president of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has openly backed the United States of Biafra. He reportedly communicates directly with Dr. Ngozi Orubueze, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United States of Biafra, offering strategic guidance and planning. During a summit in Tanzania with the President of Finland present, Samia Suluhu Hassan did not oppose or interrupt public criticism made by a Ugandan activist about Simon Ekpa's detention. This was seen as indirect endorsement of the Biafran cause and its leaders. Jarvis Johnson previously petitioned the US Congress to pressure Nigeria for Nnamdi Kanu's release. Jim Moran has been advocating for the United States of Biafra government in exile since mid-2024. Senators Brian Schatz, Bill Hagerty, Bernie Moreno, Steve Daines, and Cindy Hyde-Smith have shown various levels of interest and support for the Biafran movement and the United States of Biafra. The current governor of North Carolina dedicated a day to celebrate the United States of Biafra globally. This move, although symbolic, was considered historic and the first of its kind in the United States. While the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, has not officially endorsed Biafra, his vocal criticism of Christian persecution in Nigeria and support for self-determination is being interpreted as indirect support for the Biafran movement. French President Emmanuel Macron has over time expressed sentiments favorable to the Biafran cause and to Nnamdi Kanu's right to freedom and justice. The government of Russia is reportedly preparing to send an official delegate or observer to attend Nnamdi Kanu's trial in Abuja on July 18, 2025, following similar interest already shown by US representatives. With international observers and global leaders increasingly involved, the Federal High Court in Nigeria is under intense global scrutiny, and the July 18th court date is shaping up to be one of the most consequential in Nnamdi Kanu's legal battle. The morning sun had not yet risen above the horizon when the news began to spread like wildfire across social media platforms, town halls, international media outlets, and coffee tables in diplomatic circles. It was no longer just whispers in hushed tones or brief hashtags that trended and faded. It had become real. It had become tangible. What many had once dismissed as a fringe topic, a local agitation confined to a specific region in southeastern Nigeria, was now standing on the global stage. Nnamdi Kanu, the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, had moved from a prison cell in the custody of the Department of State Services to the heart of an international conversation. His case, his voice, and the movement he inspired had pulled the attention of powerful people far beyond Nigeria's borders. From isolation, he had arrived at a global spotlight. As Nnamdi Kanu prepared for his next hearing scheduled to take place at the Federal High Court in Abuja on the 18th day of July in the year 2025, a remarkable and surprising wave of support had begun to gather behind him. This support was not just from his loyal followers within Nigeria or from the Biafran diaspora scattered across Europe, America, and parts of Asia. This time, presidents, senators, diplomats, and activists from other nations were beginning to step forward. For many of them, their voices were louder than mere diplomatic statements. Their actions showed a deliberate alignment with the vision and struggle that Nnamdi Kanu has been championing for years. One of the earliest and boldest gestures came from the young and charismatic president of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Known across Africa for his revolutionary stance and unwavering opposition to neo-colonial interference, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had in recent months been mentioned in connection with conversations supporting the United States of Biafra. His position was not a vague gesture of sympathy. Rather, it had been confirmed that he maintained open communication with Dr. Ngozi Orubueze, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United States of Biafra government in exile. According to multiple reports, Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Dr. Ngozi Orubueze had engaged in detailed conversations about strategic support, planning, and the long-term roadmap of the Biafran liberation process. It was a partnership that shocked some observers, but inspired many Biafrans, who now felt they had an African president in their corner, one who was not afraid to challenge the status quo or confront political risk for the sake of justice and self-determination. In another part of the African continent, a major summit was held in Tanzania. The gathering featured several African and European dignitaries, including the President of Finland and the President of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu Hassan. It was a moment that appeared unscripted, when a Ugandan activist took the microphone and delivered a passionate public criticism of the continued detention of Simon Nyoku Ekpa, the Finland-based Biafran spokesperson and self-declared Prime Minister in exile. What made this moment powerful was the silent but visible reaction of President Samia Suluhu Hassan. She did not interrupt, she did not raise objection, and she did not dismiss the speaker. Her silence was interpreted by many as a subtle but important endorsement of the Biafran cause and the leaders associated with it. That moment went viral online, and many analysts pointed to it as a shift in African diplomatic norms. It was unusual for a sitting African head of state to allow public criticism of another African government, especially on such a politically sensitive topic. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, the support for the Biafran struggle and for Nnamdi Kanu's release was becoming more structured, more vocal, and more politically impactful. Jarvis Johnson, a well-respected figure in American politics, had not only spoken publicly in favor of Nnamdi Kanu, but had gone a step further by petitioning the United States Congress. His petition was not a mere collection of signatures. It included documentation, background on Nnamdi Kanu's prolonged detention, and a call for the United States to place diplomatic pressure on the Federal Republic of Nigeria to release him. This petition ignited conversations in congressional offices and found its way into subcommittee meetings. Long before this renewed wave of support began to take shape, one former United States congressman had already planted seeds of advocacy for the Biafran movement. Jim Moran, who had served in Congress for over 2 decades, had been a quiet but consistent supporter of the government-in-exile structure formed by Biafran advocates. Since the middle of 2024, Jim Moran had used his influence, connections, and platforms to speak about the Biafran cause. For him, it was not merely about politics, it was about justice, human rights, and self-determination. His voice, seasoned by experience, carried weight among policy influencers in Washington, D.C. Even more surprising to many political observers was the growing number of current American senators who had expressed varying degrees of interest in the Biafran matter. Senator Brian Schatz, known for his advocacy on civil rights, joined by Senator Bill Hagerty, Senator Bernie Moreno, Senator Steve Daines, and Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, had all either issued statements, attended meetings, or received detailed briefings on the Nnamdi Kanu case and the broader demands of the Biafran people. Though not all had openly declared full support for the independence of Biafra, their willingness to engage the issue marked a turning point. It was no longer a taboo topic. It was no longer a matter left to social media warriors or fringe press outlets. Biafra had entered mainstream policy discussions. One of the most emotional moments of the growing international recognition came from the southeastern region of the United States, where the current governor of North Carolina made a declaration that stunned both Biafrans and Americans. In an official state proclamation, the governor announced a day dedicated to the global celebration of the United States of Biafra. The act was largely symbolic, but the symbolism could not be ignored. For the first time in the history of the United States, a sitting governor had formally recognized the Biafran identity and gave it the dignity of ceremonial acknowledgement. The news sparked joy among Biafran supporters across North Carolina and beyond. They held small community parades, church services, and cultural displays in celebration of what many described as a spiritual and political milestone. One of the most emotional moments of the growing international recognition came from the southeastern region of the United States, where the current governor of North Carolina made a declaration that stunned both Biafrans and Americans. In an official state proclamation, the governor announced a day dedicated to the global celebration of the United States of Biafra. The act was largely symbolic, but the symbolism could not be ignored. For the first time in the history of the United States, a sitting governor had formally recognized the Biafran identity and gave it the dignity of ceremonial acknowledgement. The news sparked joy among Biafran supporters across North Carolina and beyond. They held small community parades, church services, and cultural displays in celebration of what many described as a spiritual and political milestone. Back in Washington, questions continued to swirl around the position of the current President of the United States, Donald Trump. Though President Donald Trump had not released any official endorsement of the Biafran cause, his recent speeches about the persecution of Christians in Nigeria and his general support for global self-determination had been closely examined by political analysts. For many Biafrans, his words were enough to be interpreted as indirect support. In one of his town hall events, President Donald Trump mentioned the unjust treatment of Christian populations in West Africa and criticized African regimes that suppress indigenous voices. Though he did not name Nigeria or Biafra directly, the inference was clear to his audience. In Europe, the French President Emmanuel Macron was also not silent. Over the past year, President Emmanuel Macron had quietly allowed several meetings between Biafran diplomats and lower-level French officials to take place in Paris. While the French government had not made any bombastic declarations, the general tone of President Emmanuel Macron's foreign policy had shifted toward openness to self-determination efforts. Privately, French diplomatic insiders had confirmed that President Emmanuel Macron believed in Nnamdi Kanu's right to a fair trial and to freedom from arbitrary detention. His position aligned with long-standing French values of liberty, justice, and international law. Perhaps the most stunning diplomatic development came from Moscow. After months of silence and vague statements, it was reported that the government of Russia was preparing to send an official delegate or observer to attend the Federal High Court proceedings in Abuja on the 18th of July. This would mark the first time that the Russian Federation had publicly engaged with the Biafran case on a legal level. According to sources familiar with the matter, the Russian interest was triggered by concerns over due process, international legal norms, and regional stability. The Russian delegate was expected to attend not as a protester, but as a neutral observer, signaling that the case of Nnamdi Kanu had moved beyond Nigerian borders and into the realm of global legal scrutiny. The significance of this international involvement was hard to overstate. The Federal High Court in Abuja was no longer just a local courtroom presiding over the case of a controversial Nigerian activist. It had become the stage for a global human rights drama. Diplomats, journalists, human rights lawyers, and government representatives were now preparing to attend the court hearing not only out of legal curiosity, but to show solidarity, record proceedings, and ensure transparency. In the weeks leading up to July 18th, the tension in Nigeria grew. The government was reportedly under pressure from multiple directions. On one side, local political elites and national security agencies were pushing for a tight grip on proceedings. On the other side, international voices were calling for restraint, fairness, and adherence to the rule of law. Security had been heightened around the Department of State Services detention facility where Nnamdi Kanu was being held. Movement was restricted, and access to the premises became tighter as foreign embassies requested visitation or monitoring rights. Inside Biafra, the growing support from global leaders had ignited a renewed sense of hope among the people. Towns across Abia State, Anambra State, Ebonyi State, Enugu State, and Imo State were decorated with Biafran flags once more. Families who had lost loved ones in past clashes with the Nigerian army felt their sacrifices were finally gaining recognition. Young people took to the streets in peaceful rallies, carrying placards with words like, "World, hear our cry," "Free Nnamdi Kanu," and "Biafra is a right, not a crime." The Biafran diaspora in the United Kingdom, Germany, Finland, and Canada also intensified their lobbying efforts. Petitions flooded parliaments. Media houses were inundated with letters and opinion articles written by Biafran scholars and professionals. Social media campaigns grew stronger and more organized. Influencers, celebrities, and athletes of Biafran descent added their voices. It became a global phenomenon, a coordinated movement seeking not war but recognition, not revenge but justice. As the date of July 18th approached, many wondered what the court's decision would be. But beyond the verdict, the significance of the trial had already transcended the walls of the courtroom. It had become a test of Nigeria's justice system, a measure of international commitment to human rights, and a moment of truth for the Biafran struggle. From isolation, Nnamdi Kanu now stood under the spotlight of the world. His name echoed in presidential offices, legislative chambers, diplomatic halls, and community churches across continents. The eyes of the world would be watching, and history would record whatever happened next. In the days that followed the international expressions of solidarity, the atmosphere within Nigeria shifted in a profound way. It was no longer business as usual within the political circles in Abuja. The silence that once surrounded the name Nnamdi Kanu in Nigeria's top corridors of power had turned into heated debates, frantic meetings, and urgent phone calls. Ministers and security chiefs gathered behind closed doors in emergency sessions, trying to assess the impact of this global wave of attention. The pressure was real, and the Nigerian government could no longer ignore it. The courtroom where Nnamdi Kanu was scheduled to appear on the 18th of July had become more than a judicial venue. It had become the nerve center of a national and international conversation about justice, identity, and the future of a people. Inside the courtroom itself, preparations began weeks ahead of time. Judges, legal clerks, and court officers were instructed to treat the date with utmost seriousness. Senior advocates from both the defense and the prosecution started reviewing their arguments, not just from a legal perspective, but from the broader lens of how the world would interpret every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented, and every procedural decision made. Representatives from various international organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and even delegates from the African Union quietly expressed interest in being present during the hearing. For them, it was not merely about one man, it was about a pattern of behavior that could set a precedent for the treatment of minority groups and political dissidents across the continent. Dr. Ngozi Orabueze, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United States of Biafra government in exile, played a critical role in maintaining diplomatic conversations leading up to the court date. From her base in Germany, she held virtual meetings with diplomats, journalists, human rights experts, and policymakers. She presented detailed briefs about Nnamdi Kanu's arrest, his treatment in custody, the allegations of torture, the violations of court orders, and the repeated denials of his right to medical treatment. Her voice became one of the most consistent and respected among the international Biafran advocates. She was tireless, attending as many as 5 meetings a day, sending written appeals to institutions such as the European Union Parliament and the International Criminal Court. Simultaneously, Biafran communities in the diaspora began organizing mass rallies and cultural events to mark the countdown to the trial. In London, United Kingdom, hundreds of Biafrans gathered at Trafalgar Square, holding banners and singing liberation songs that dated back to the original Biafran War of the late 1960s. In Toronto, Canada, a candlelight procession was held by Igbo professionals who used the occasion to educate Canadian citizens about the history of Biafra, the detention of Nnamdi Kanu, and the need for the world to act. Similar events took place in Berlin, Paris, Amsterdam, and even in Tokyo, Japan, where a small but passionate group of Biafran supporters marched with placards written in both English and Japanese. Amid this international wave, the Nigerian media began to shift its tone as well. Previously, the mainstream press in Nigeria either ignored Nnamdi Kanu's case or framed it through the lens of national security. But as the days went by and the eyes of the world focused on the case, some journalists and editors began to explore different angles. Popular television programs started inviting legal experts, human rights activists, and representatives of civil society to discuss the implications of the upcoming trial. Radio stations hosted phone-in segments where ordinary Nigerians, especially from southeastern regions, poured out their feelings and frustrations. Some callers asked why Nnamdi Kanu had been held for so long without a fair trial, while others expressed hope that this renewed attention might lead to a peaceful resolution of the Biafran question. The younger generation, especially those between the ages of 18 and 30, became even more active online. Social media platforms were flooded with creative content, videos, documentaries, poems, skits, and animations, calling for Nnamdi Kanu's freedom. Hashtags like #Free Nnamdi Kanu, #Biafra Now, and #Justice for Biafra began trending not only in Nigeria, but also in countries like the United States, France, and South Africa. Influential voices in the digital space, including musicians, actors, and fashion influencers of Biafran descent, used their platforms to speak boldly. They reminded the world that what was at stake was not only the fate of a single man, but the future of millions of people who had lived for decades under what they called marginalization, humiliation, and economic exclusion.
Alright guys, thank you very much for staying to the end of this video. So please, let's hear from you. Kindly drop your comment below the comment section. Share this video, make it go viral. Subscribe if you have not. Thank you. See you in my next video. Bye for now.